Tzenkethi eyes gushed bluish tears of relief as the United Earth Federation's battered dreadnoughts ripped apart the Kragu swarm in the skies over their scorched planet below. Hope was all that remained on Tzenketh Prime. Orbital bombardment scorched cities into glass. Kragu swarms butchered civilians by the millions. The reptilian Tzenketh's own fleet lay broken, hundreds of ships drifting as burning hulks. A desperate distress signal had been sent by the Tzenketh High Council, despite their skepticism and pride. The Kragu would slaughter their entire race if help did not arrive soon. The call pinged off relay buoys, traversing the void, broadcasting on all frequencies. It reached the United Earth Federation. UEF High Command recognized the severity, dispatching Captain Nathan Thomas in humanity's strongest task force. The last functional Tzenketh space station picked up the UEF fleet signatures exiting warp. Hails pinged the dreadnoughts. Battered Tzenketh ships formed up, struggling with damaged engines, leaking atmosphere. The combined fleet set course for Tzenketh Prime. Sensors lit up with incoming Kragu attack craft, an endless swarm of organic ships as numerous as locusts. UEF weapons charged, human sharpshooters sighted in, ammunition feeds locked into miniguns, missile tubes flooded with coolant, point defense grids hummed to life. The UEF had brought their most powerful ships, armed with technology that could scorch planets clean of life. Tzenketh had never seen such destructive potential. The human weapons were ancient and inelegant, but undeniably effective. This would determine if Tzenketh Prime survived, if the Tzenketh race lived or faced extinction. Humanity would do what needed to be done. Captain Nathan Thomas gripped the armrests of his command chair, knuckles turning white, as he watched the UEF dreadnoughts take up defensive positions around the ravaged planet of Tzenketh Prime. The Kragu swarm continued to press their relentless assault, organic ships slamming against the UEF's shields like a tidal wave of chitin and hate. Suddenly, a priority message from UEF High Command flashed across Thomas's display. He opened the encrypted file, eyes widening as he read its contents. The UEF had been hiding a secret weapon all this time, a fleet of ancient warships known as the Progenitor Fleet. Discovered in a long-forgotten star system and reverse-engineered by human scientists, these ships possessed technology far beyond anything the UEF or Tzenkethi had ever seen. The message made it clear that deploying the Progenitor Fleet was strictly forbidden, as the UEF government feared the consequences of unleashing such advanced weaponry. But as Thomas watched another Tzenketh ship explode under the Kragu onslaught, he knew he had no choice. He had to disobey orders and request the fleet's deployment. "Comms, send a priority message to UEF High Command," Thomas barked. "Request immediate deployment of the Progenitor Fleet to Tzenketh Prime. Authorization code, Thomas Alpha 927. Moments later, a swirling vortex of energy tore open the fabric of space near the embattled planet. 10 massive battleships, flanked by dozens of smaller support craft, emerged from the rift. Their sleek, angular hulls gleamed with an otherworldly alloy, and strange energy signatures pulsed from their weapons arrays. The Kragu swarm immediately detected the new threat, and a portion of the insectoid ships broke off to engage the Progenitor Fleet. But as the ancient warships opened fire, it became clear that the Kragu had met their match. Lances of pure energy sliced through the organic ships like a scalpel through flesh, while shimmering shields absorbed the Kragu's return fire with ease. The Tzenkethi and UEF forces could only watch in awe as the Progenitor Fleet tore through the Kragu swarm, their advanced weaponry making short work of the insectoid invaders. For a moment, it seemed like victory was at hand. But as the battle raged on, the true scale of the Kragu threat became apparent. Wave after wave of organic ships poured into the system, drawn by the presence of the Progenitor Fleet. Even with their advanced technology, the ancient warships could not hold back the tide forever. Captain Nathan Thomas clenched his fists as he watched the Progenitor Fleet tear into the Kragu swarm. It was an awe-inspiring sight, but he knew it wouldn't be enough. The Kragu's numbers were too vast, their resolve too strong. They would keep coming, wave after wave, until the Progenitor Fleet was overwhelmed. He turned to his tactical officer. "Lieutenant, Get me everything we have on that Kragu mothership. I want to know its weaknesses, its defenses, everything. The officer nodded and started tapping on his console. Thomas looked back at the view screen, his mind racing. If they could take out the mothership, it might throw the Kragu into disarray, buy them some time. He opened a channel to High Counselor Antares on the Senkithi flagship. The reptilian alien appeared on the screen, his scales shimmering with worry. "Captain Thomas, our forces are holding, but barely. What do you propose?" Thomas leaned forward. "Counselor, our scouts have identified a Kragu mothership near the gas giant. I believe it's their command and control center. If we can infiltrate it and destroy it from within, it might give us a chance." Thomas met his gaze steadily. "Counselor, with all due respect, this may be our only chance. The progenitor fleet is powerful, but it won't last forever against these numbers. We have to strike at the heart of their invasion." Antares was silent for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. "Very well, Captain, I will assemble my best warriors, but know this, if we fail, the blood of my people will be on your hands." He cut the transmission and turned to his crew. "All right, people, let's get to work. I want a strike team assembled in the hangar bay in 10 minutes. We're going to take the fight to the Kragu." 10 minutes later, Thomas stood in the hangar bay checking his pulse rifle. A squad of UEF Marines stood at attention, their armor gleaming under the harsh lights. Next to them, a group of Tzenkethi shadow blades waited silently, their black scales blending into the shadows. Thomas nodded to them. "All right, listen up. We've captured a Kragu shuttle and obtained its access codes. That's our ticket inside. Once we're in, we fight our way to the central core and plant the antimatter charge. Then we get the hell out of there before it blows." The Marines and Shadowblades nodded, their faces grim. They knew the odds of survival were slim. Thomas led them into the shuttle, strapping himself into the pilot's seat. He punched in the access codes and the shuttle lifted off, gliding out of the hangar bay and into the chaos of the battle. They approached the Kragu mothership, a massive, pulsating mass of chitin and organic circuitry. Thomas transmitted the codes and held his breath. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a hatch on the mothership's side slid open, allowing them inside. They landed in a cavernous hangar bay, filled with dozens of Kragu ships. Alarms began to blare as they exited the shuttle, pulse rifles at the ready. "Go, go, go," Thomas shouted, as the first wave of Kragu drones and warriors swarmed towards them. The Marines and Shadowblades opened fire, their advanced weapons tearing through the insectoid defenders. They fought their way deeper into the mothership, the corridors twisting and pulsing around them like the innards of some giant beast. Kragu warriors lunged at them from every shadow, but the strike team's superior tactics and weaponry proved too much for them. Finally, they reached the central core, a vast chamber dominated by a pulsating mass of flesh and circuitry. And there, towering over them, was the Kragu Queen. She was a nightmarish sight, her body a mass of chitinous armor and razor-sharp claws. Her head was a crown of pulsating antennae, her eyes glowing with malevolent intelligence. "Take her down!" Thomas shouted, opening fire. The Marines joined in, pouring plasma bolts and railgun rounds into the Queen's hide. But she was too strong, too fast. She lashed out with her claws, sending Marines flying like ragdolls. The shadow blades leapt at her, their monomolecular blades flashing, but she swatted them aside like insects. Thomas gritted his teeth and charged forward, ducking under a sweeping claw and rolling to his feet. He primed the antimatter charge and leapt onto the Queen's back, clambering up her armored hide towards her head. With a final, desperate lunge, he slammed the charge onto her head and activated the detonator. The Queen screamed, a sound that seemed to shake the very fabric of reality. Thomas felt a searing pain in his side as one of her claws found its mark. He tumbled from her back, landing hard on the floor. Blood poured from his wound, pooling on the pulsating ground. The Queen thrashed and convulsed, the antimatter charge eating away at her skull. She let out one final, deafening shriek. And then the antimatter charge detonated with a blinding flash, vaporizing the Kragu Queen's head in an instant. The strike team was hurled back by the shockwave, their armor scorched and battered. Alarms blared as the mothership's central core began to collapse, its pulsating walls cracking and spewing ichor. "We need to move now," shouted Lieutenant Varys, the Tsenkethi Shadow Blade commander. He hoisted the unconscious Captain Thomas over his shoulder, his black scales glistening with the human's blood. The team staggered through the disintegrating corridors, dodging falling debris and gouts of searing plasma. Kragu drones, now directionless without their queen, skittered about in confusion, some even turning on each other in their frenzy. They reached the hangar bay, the Tsenkethi shuttle waiting for them like a beacon of hope. Pulse rifle fire and the hiss of monomolecular blades cleared a path through the remaining Kragu as the team boarded the shuttle. Varys laid Thomas on a medical bunk, his face grim as he saw the extent of the human's wounds. The shuttle rocketed out of the hangar, just as the mothership exploded behind them, a miniature supernova that lit up the void. In the chaos that followed, the Kragu swarm fell into disarray, their hive mind shattered. The progenitor fleet and the beleaguered UEF and Tsenkethi ships seized the moment, their weapons tearing into the disoriented insectoid ships with ruthless efficiency. On the surface of Tsenketh Prime, the tide of battle turned as well. The Kragu ground forces, suddenly cut off from their orbital support, faltered and broke under the renewed onslaught of Tsenkethi defenders and UEF marines. Plasma fire and sonic blades cut through chitinous armor, while heavy tanks crushed the Kragu beneath their treads. The shuttle docked with the UEF flagship, the TSS Valiant. A medical team rushed Captain Thomas to the ship's state-of-the-art medbay, his broken body placed gently into a regenerative stasis pod. The advanced technology would keep him alive, but his recovery would be long and arduous. High Counselor Antares, his ceremonial robes torn and stained with blood, walked slowly into the medbay. The weight of the battle, of the sacrifices made, hung heavy on his shoulders. He approached the stasis pod, placing a clawed hand on its cool surface. Tears welled in his reptilian eyes as he gazed at the wounded human within. "Thank you, Captain Thomas," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Your bravery and the might of your progenitor fleet have saved us all. The Tsenkethi will never forget what you and your people have done for us." He bowed his head, the tears now flowing freely down his scaly face. The medbay was silent save for the soft beeping of the stasis pod, a reminder of the price paid for victory. In the void above, the shattered remains of the Kragu swarm drifted lifelessly, a testament to the power of the ancient progenitor fleet. But even as the ships of the UEF and Tsenkethi took up defensive positions around the ravaged planet, a sense of unease hung in the air. For in the deepest reaches of space, far beyond the boundaries of known space, a new threat stirred. The Kragu had been defeated, but they were merely the vanguard of... Captain Nathan Thomas jolted awake inside the regenerative stasis pod, his eyes snapping open as the visions faded. He gasped for breath, his chest heaving, as the pod's lid hissed open. Medics rushed to his side, checking his vitals and helping him sit up. "Captain, you need to rest," one medic urged, trying to guide him back down. Thomas shook his head, pushing himself to his feet. "No time, we have a new threat." He staggered out of the medbay, ignoring the medics' protests. He had to get to the bridge, had to warn them about the Velkari. On the bridge of the TSS Valiant, alarms blared as the viewscreen displayed the sleek black ships of the Velkari, dropping out of warp. The crew scrambled to battle stations, the ship's weapons powering up. "Hail from the lead ship, sir," the COEMS officer reported. "They're demanding to speak with our commander." The acting captain, a grizzled veteran named Warner, nodded. "On screen." The viewscreen flickered, revealing the gaunt, pale blue face of Zalcor, the Velkari warlord. His red eyes glowed with malice as he spoke. "Humans," he spat, his voice dripping with contempt, "you have stolen what is rightfully ours. The progenitor fleet belongs to the Velkari. Surrender it now, along with all Velkari artifacts in your possession, or face the consequences." Warner leaned forward, his jaw set. "The progenitor fleet was abandoned when we found it. We have no proof of your claim, and we will not surrender our most powerful defense on the word of an unknown alien species. Zalkor's eyes narrowed. Then you have sealed your fate. The transmission cut out, replaced by the image of the Velkari fleet advancing on the UEF ships. They're powering weapons, the tactical officer shouted. Raise shields, ready all weapons, Warner ordered. The Valiant shuddered as the first volley of Velkari fire slammed into its shields. The UEF ships returned fire, their railguns and plasma cannons lancing out towards the enemy fleet. But the Velkari ships were too fast, too maneuverable. They danced around the UEF fire, their own weapons tearing through the human shields like they were made of paper. Thomas burst onto the bridge, still in his medical gown. Captain Warner, I have crucial information about the Velkari and the progenitor fleet. Warner spun in his chair. Captain Thomas, what are you doing out of medbay? Before Thomas could respond, another volley of Velkari fire rocked the ship. Consoles exploded in showers of sparks, crewmen thrown from their seats. Warner clenched his fists. What about the progenitor fleet? Can they assist? Negative, sir, the comms officer reported. They're still undergoing repairs and upgrades from the battle with the Kragu. They won't be operational for hours. He took a breath, steadying himself against another impact. The original creators of the fleet, the Jalkai, rebelled against the Velkari and scattered the ships to keep them out of the wrong hands. Warner frowned. If that's true, then the Velkari have no rightful claim to the fleet. But that doesn't help us now. We're outgunned and outmatched. Thomas's eyes flashed with determination. We have to hold the line, buy time for the progenitor fleet to come online. They may be our only hope against the Velkari. The UEF ships poured fire into Zalkor's flagship, their weapons finally scoring hits through its advanced shields. The black ship lurched, smoke pouring from rents in its hull. But the Velkari kept coming, their weapons hammering the human fleet. One by one UEF ships fell, consumed by the relentless onslaught. On the Valiant's bridge, Thomas gripped the back of the captain's chair as the ship shook around him. He closed his eyes, reaching out with his mind, trying to touch the progenitor fleet, to will them into action. In the depths of space, ancient power stirred. The progenitor fleet, responding to Thomas's psychic call, began to awaken. One by one, the massive battleships powered up, their ancient weapons and shields coming online with crackles of arcane energy. But would they arrive in time to turn the tide against the Velkari onslaught? Or would the UEF fleet, and the brave men and women fighting to protect the Tsenkithi people, be nothing more than a memory, lost to the unforgiving void of space? Captain Nathan Thomas ran through the corridors of the TSS Valiant, his medical gown flapping behind him. Pain shot through his body with every step, his injuries from the battle with the Kragu Queen not yet fully healed. But he pushed through, the urgency of his newfound knowledge driving him forward. He burst onto the bridge, startling the crew. High Counselor Antares and the UEF High Command turned to face him, their expressions a mix of surprise and concern. Captain Thomas, what are you doing out of medbay? Admiral Graves, the head of the UEF fleet, asked. Thomas ignored the question, his eyes blazing with intensity. I've had visions, he said, his voice hoarse, visions of the progenitor fleet's true origins and the role of the Velkari. He quickly relayed what he had learned, how the Velkari had once been the guardians of the ancient fleet, but had become corrupt and used the technology to enslave other races. How the Jalkai, the fleet's creators, had rebelled and scattered the ships across the galaxy. Antares hissed, his reptilian eyes narrowing. If what you say is true, then the Velkari have no claim to the fleet. He outlined his proposal, to use the progenitor fleet as bait, luring the Velkari into a trap, while a small team infiltrated their flagship to recover a powerful Jalkai artifact known as the Heart of the Ancients. According to my visions, the heart is the key to unlocking the full potential of the progenitor fleet, Thomas explained. With it, we can defeat the Velkari once and for all. We'll lose a lot more than the fleet if we don't act, Thomas countered. The Velkari are an existential threat to both the UEF and the Tsenkethi. We have to stop them, no matter the cost. There was a long moment of silence as the High Command considered Thomas's words. Finally, Antares spoke. "The Tzenkethi will stand with you, Captain," he said, his voice firm. "We owe you and your people a great debt. If this is what it takes to repay it, then so be it." Admiral Graves sighed, then nodded. "Very well, we'll set the trap and prepare the fleet. But the infiltration team is on you, Thomas. Choose wisely." He turned to leave, his mind already racing with the preparations that needed to be made. But Antares stopped him with a clawed hand on his shoulder. "Be careful, Captain," the Tzenkethi said, his eyes glinting with concern. "The Velkari are not to be underestimated." Thomas met his gaze, his jaw set with grim determination. "Neither are we," he said. As the UEF and Tzenkethi forces mobilized, Thomas handpicked his team for the infiltration mission. He chose the best of the best, elite UEF Marines and Tzenkethi Shadow Blades, each one skilled in combat and stealth. Among them was Sergeant Jack Harper, a grizzled veteran who had fought alongside Thomas in countless battles. Harper was a man of few words, but his loyalty and courage were unquestionable. "We're with you, Captain," Harper said as they prepared their gear. "To the end." Kai Zan, a young Tzenkethi Shadowblade, was another key member of the team. Despite his youth, he had already proven himself in battle, his monomolecular blades flashing with deadly precision. As the fleets converged on the chosen battlefield, a remote and uninhabited star system known as the Graveyard, Thomas and his team boarded a captured Velkari shuttle. Tzenkethi intelligence had provided them with stolen access codes, their ticket onto the enemy flagship. Thomas settled into the pilot's seat, his hands steady on the controls despite the pain that still throbbed through his body. He looked back at his team, their faces grim but determined. "This is it," he said. "The fate of the galaxy rests on our shoulders. Let's not let it down." With a deep breath, he guided the shuttle out of the hangar bay and into the void of space, towards the looming shape of the Velkari flagship, the VKS Dreadnought. The final showdown was about to begin. The Velkari shuttle glided silently into the VKS Dreadnought's hangar bay, its stolen access codes granting it safe passage through the ship's formidable defenses. Captain Thomas, Sergeant Harper, Kai Zan, and the rest of the infiltration team emerged from the shuttle, weapons at the ready, their faces set with grim determination. The hangar bay was a cavernous space, its walls lined with sleek black Velkari fighters and assault craft. The team moved quickly and quietly, their footsteps echoing on the polished metal floor. They had studied the Dreadnought's schematics, memorizing the fastest route to the chamber housing the heart of the ancients. As they made their way deeper into the ship, the sounds of battle could be heard reverberating through the halls. In the graveyard system beyond, the progenitor fleet, under the command of Admiral Elena Ivanova, had engaged the Velkari ships in a fierce confrontation. The ancient weapons of the progenitor ships, long dormant but now humming with power, proved to be a match for the advanced Velkari technology. On board the Dreadnought, Thomas and his team encountered their first resistance, a squad of elite Velkari warriors, their pale blue skin contrasting with the black of their armor, their red eyes glowing with malice. The team took cover behind a bulkhead as the warriors opened fire, energy bolts sizzling through the air. Harper leaned out from cover, his pulse rifle barking as he sent a burst of rounds towards the Velkari. Two of the warriors fell, their armor smoking where the rounds had found their mark. Kai Zan moved with lightning speed, his monomolecular blades flashing as he closed the distance to the remaining warriors. He ducked under a swinging energy staff, his blades slicing through the warrior's armor as if it were paper. Thomas and the rest of the team pressed forward, picking off the remaining Velkari with precise shots. They moved through the ship, their progress slowed by the constant attacks from Velkari warriors and the ship's automated security systems. As they neared the chamber housing the heart of the ancients, a deep, resonant laugh echoed through the corridor. Zalkor, the Velkari warlord, stepped out from the shadows, his energy staff crackling with power. "Foolish humans," he sneered, his red eyes fixed on Thomas. "You think you can take what is rightfully ours?" Thomas raised his pulse rifle, his finger tight on the trigger. "The progenitor fleet belongs to no one, Zalcor, and we will not let you use its power to enslave the galaxy." Zalcor laughed again, the sound sending shivers down Thomas's spine. The warlord raised his staff, and the team felt a sudden, crushing weight descend upon them, driving them to their knees. Harper struggled to his feet, his muscles straining against the invisible force. He charged at Zalcor, a battle cry on his lips, only to be swatted aside like a ragdoll, his body slamming into the wall with a sickening crunch. Kaizen, his movements slowed by the gravitational field, managed to close the distance to Zalcor, his blades slashing at the warlord's armor. But Zalcor was too quick, his staff whirling in a blur of motion, the blades of the young Zenkethi no match for the ancient Velkari weapon. A searing bolt of energy from the staff caught Kaizen in the chest, burning through his armor and sending him sprawling to the floor, his scales charred and smoking. Harper, seeing his comrade fall, pushed himself to his feet once more, ignoring the pain that lanced through his body. With a roar of defiance, he tackled Zalcor, the two of them grappling for control of the energy staff. The staff discharged, the blast carving a deep gouge in the floor and sending both Harper and Zalcor tumbling through a breach in the wall. They fell, locked in mortal combat, plummeting down a deep shaft that led to the ship's reactor core. Thomas, freed from the gravitational field, sprinted to the chamber door, his heart pounding in his chest. He could hear the sounds of Velkari reinforcements approaching, their footsteps ringing on the metal floor. The door slid open, revealing a small circular room dominated by a pulsating crystal sphere, the heart of the ancients. Thomas approached the artifact, his hand trembling as he reached out to grasp it. As his fingers closed around the heart, Thomas's mind was flooded with visions, images of the Jalkai, of their vast wisdom and the true potential of the progenitor fleet. He saw the fall of the Velkari, their corruption and betrayal of the Jalkai's trust. With a gasp, Thomas pulled the heart free of its containment field, the room shaking violently as the artifact's power surged through the ship. Alarms blared, the lights flickering as the dreadnought's systems went haywire. Thomas turned, the heart clutched tightly to his chest, and ran back to where Kaizen lay wounded. He gathered the young Zenkethi in his arms, hauling him back towards the waiting shuttle. The dreadnought shuddered and groaned, the metal of its hull screaming as it began to collapse in on itself. Thomas stumbled, nearly losing his footing as the deck bucked beneath him. He reached the shuttle, dragging Kaizen inside and sealing the hatch. His hands flew over the controls, the engines flaring to life as he guided the small craft out of the hangar bay and into the chaos of the battle beyond. Behind them, the VKS dreadnought, once the pride of the Velkari fleet, crumpled like a tin can, its reactor core finally succumbing to the damage inflicted by the heart's power. The ship exploded in a blinding flash of light, the shockwave buffeting the escaping shuttle. The Velkari shuttle docked with the TSS Valiant, its airlock hissing open. Captain Thomas staggered out, supporting a badly wounded Kaizen. Medics rushed forward, transferring the young Zenkethi to a stretcher and whisking him away to the medbay. Thomas clutched the heart of the ancients to his chest, its pulsing light illuminating his haggard features. "Get this to the research lab now," he ordered, handing the artifact to a waiting science officer. In the lab, UEF and Zenkethi scientists pored over the heart, their instruments probing its ancient surface. Dr. Elena Petrova, the lead researcher, shook her head in amazement. "The technology is beyond anything we've ever seen. It's not just a power source, but a repository of knowledge." On the bridge, Admiral Ivanova watched the tactical display with growing concern. The Velkari fleet was pressing their attack, their ships swarming around the progenitor fleet like angry hornets. "Admiral, the Velkari are launching shuttles," the tactical officer reported. "They're heading straight for the Valiant." Ivanova's eyes narrowed. "They're after the heart. All ships intercept those shuttles. Don't let them reach the Valiant." The progenitor ships moved to block the Velkari, their ancient weapons flaring to life. Velkari shuttles exploded under the onslaught, but more kept coming, slipping past the defensive screen. In the research lab, The heart began to pulse more rapidly, its light growing brighter. Dr. Petrova stepped back, shielding her eyes. "Something's happening," she said, her voice tight with tension. Thomas burst into the lab, his eyes widening as he saw the heart. It was almost blinding now, its light filling the room. Suddenly, Thomas's mind was flooded with images, visions of the Jalkai, their vast knowledge unfolding before him. He saw the true potential of the progenitor fleet, the power that had been locked away for eons. And he saw what needed to be done. Thomas grabbed the heart, ignoring the searing heat that burned his hands. He turned and ran, racing through the corridors of the Valiant as the ship shook under the impact of Velkari weapons. He reached the bridge, the heart held high. "Admiral, I know what we have to do," he said, his voice ringing with conviction. "The heart has shown me the way." Ivanova turned, her eyes widening as she saw the artifact. "Captain, what are you doing?" Thomas stepped forward, the heart pulsing in his hands. "We have to use the heart to unlock the full potential of the progenitor fleet. It's the only way to stop the Velkari." And then, with a blinding flash, the heart of the ancients unleashed its power. A wave of energy swept out from the Valiant, washing over the progenitor fleet. The ancient ships pulsed with new life, their weapons glowing with an intensity never seen before. The Velkari ships, caught in the wave, shuddered and went dark, their systems overloaded by the surge of power. They drifted, helpless, as the progenitor fleet moved in, their weapons tearing through the enemy ships like paper. On the bridge of the Valiant, Thomas opened his eyes, the heart still glowing in his hands. He looked out at the battlefield, watching as the Velkari fleet crumbled under the onslaught of the reborn progenitor fleet. But even as the tide turned in their favor, Thomas knew that the fight was far from over. The Velkari were a tenacious foe, and they would not give up easily. There would be more battles to come, more sacrifices to be made. Thomas strode onto the bridge of the TSS Valiant, the heart of the ancients pulsing with energy in his hands. Admiral Ivanova turned to face him, her eyes widening at the sight of the glowing artifact. "Captain Thomas, what's happening?" she asked, her voice tight with concern. Thomas held up the heart, its light casting an eerie glow across the bridge. "The heart has shown me the way," he said, his voice steady despite the chaos of the battle raging around them. "We need to use its power to unlock the full potential of the progenitor fleet." Ivanova nodded, her face set with determination. "What do you need us to do?" "Have the progenitor fleet form a defensive perimeter around the Valiant," Thomas ordered, "and tell the UEF and Tsenkethi ships to fall back to a safe distance." As Ivanova relayed the orders, Thomas approached the command console, the heart thrumming with power in his hands. He placed the artifact into a specially designed interface, the ship's systems whirring to life as they connected with the ancient device. With a deep breath, Thomas began the activation sequence. The heart glowed brighter, its pulsing light growing in intensity until it filled the bridge with a blinding radiance. The ship shook as the heart's energy surged through its systems, the consoles sparking and flickering under the strain. And then, with a final brilliant pulse, the heart unleashed its power. A massive wave of energy exploded outward from the Valiant, washing over the progenitor fleet like a tsunami of light. As the energy wave passed over the ancient ships, their hulls began to shimmer and shift. Sleek, crystalline structures emerged from the metal, pulsating with the same otherworldly energy as the heart. The transformed ships gleamed in the void, their weapons and shields thrumming with newfound power. The progenitor fleet moved as one, the crystalline ships forming up into a tight defensive formation around the Valiant. Their weapons charged, the air crackling with energy as they prepared to engage the Velkari. On the tactical display, Thomas watched as the Velkari ships faltered, caught off guard by the sudden transformation of the progenitor fleet. The crystalline ships opened fire, their weapons cutting through the Velkari shields as if they were made of paper. The Velkari ships reeled under the onslaught, their hulls buckling and tearing as the progenitor fleet's weapons found their mark. Explosions lit up the void as Velkari ships shattered into debris, their crews consumed by the unforgiving vacuum of space. But even as the tide of battle turned in their favor, a new threat emerged. A massive Velkari dreadnought, the VKS Harbinger, dropped out of warp, its hull dwarfing even the largest of the progenitor ships. On the bridge of the Harbinger, Zalcor sat in his command chair, his face battered and bloodied from his confrontation with Sergeant Harper. His eyes burned with rage as he stared at the tactical display, watching as his fleet was torn apart by the transformed progenitor ships. The Harbinger's weapons charged, a deep thrumming hum filling the bridge. On the tactical display, a massive energy signature bloomed to life, the dreadnought's main weapon, a gravitonic cannon capable of tearing ships apart with a single shot. Thomas felt a sudden surge of danger through his connection to the heart. He spun to face Ivanova, his eyes wide with urgency. "The Harbinger is targeting us directly," he said, his voice tight with tension. "They're going to try to destroy the heart." Ivanova opened her mouth to respond, but was cut off as the ship shuddered violently. The lights flickered and died, plunging the bridge into darkness. Emergency power kicked in a moment later, bathing the room in an eerie red glow. On the view screen, the Harbinger loomed large, its gravitonic cannon glowing with an intense, sickly light. Thomas could feel the weapon's power even from this distance, a twisting, wrenching sensation that seemed to distort the very fabric of space around them. He knew with a sudden, terrible certainty that the Valiant could not withstand a direct hit from that weapon. The ship would be torn apart, the heart destroyed, and their last hope for victory lost. In that moment, Thomas made his decision. With a final, determined nod to Ivanova, he turned and sprinted from the bridge, racing towards the hangar bay and the waiting shuttle that would take him to the Harbinger. He would confront Zalcor directly, face to face, and do whatever it took to stop the Velkari warlord from destroying everything they had fought so hard to protect, even if it meant sacrificing his own life in the process. Captain Thomas felt the heart of the ancients thrumming with power in his hands as he raced onto the bridge of the TSS Valiant. Admiral Ivanova spun to face him, her eyes widening at the sight of the glowing artifact. "Sir, the Harbinger's gravitonic cannon is charging," the tactical officer shouted, panic edging into his voice. Thomas didn't hesitate. He slammed his hand down on the emergency evacuation controls. Alarms blared through the ship as escape pods jettisoned, carrying the crew to safety. "Captain, what are you doing?" Ivanova demanded, even as Kaizan grabbed her arm, trying to pull her towards the escape pods. "I have to stay," Thomas said, his voice steady despite the chaos erupting around him. "The heart, it's the only way to stop them." Ivanova opened her mouth to protest, but Thomas cut her off. "Go, Admiral. Get our people to safety. It's been an honor serving with you." Tears glistened in Ivanova's eyes, but she nodded, allowing Kaizan to lead her away. Thomas watched them go, then turned back to the view screen. The Harbinger loomed before him, its cannon glowing with deadly energy. Thomas placed the heart of the ancients into the interface, feeling its power surge through the ship's systems. He gripped the helm controls, steering the Valiant directly towards the Velkari dreadnought. The gravitonic cannon fired, a lance of pure destructive force spearing towards the Valiant. At the same instant, Thomas released the full might of the heart, ancient energy engulfing the human ship. The two vessels collided in a cataclysmic explosion, a blinding flash of light consuming them both. Debris spun through the void, all that remained of the once proud ships. In the stunned silence that followed, the remaining Velkari ships faltered, their formation crumbling. One by one, they signaled their surrender, unwilling to continue the fight with their leader and flagship destroyed. Aboard the UEF and Tsenkethi ships, the survivors of the Valiant's crew watched in numb disbelief as the wreckage of their ship drifted through space. Admiral Ivanova bowed her head, grief etched into her features. In the days that followed, the UEF and Tsenkethi mourned the loss of Captain Nathan Thomas. Memorials were held, his name spoken with reverence and sorrow. He had sacrificed everything to save them, to preserve the legacy of the Jalkai, and ensure a future for both their races. Kai-Zan, his scales still bearing the scars of his battles, stood before the UEF High Command, accepting the role of Tzenkethi ambassador. It was a symbol of the new unity between their peoples, forged in the fires of war and the crucible of shared loss. Admiral Ivanova took command of the Progenitor Fleet, the ancient ships now a permanent part of the UEF military. Under her guidance, the fleet began the slow process of rebuilding, strengthening the alliance, and preparing for whatever challenges lay ahead. As the galaxy began to heal, the story of Nathan Thomas and the Heart of the Ancients passed into legend. Parents told their children of the brave human captain who had given his life for the sake of others, of the power of sacrifice and unity. The UEF and Tzenkethi, once bitter foes, now stood shoulder to shoulder, guardians of a hard-won peace. But even as the Alliance celebrated their victory and mourned their fallen hero, a new threat stirred in the depths of uncharted space. Drawn by the echoes of the Heart's power, this unknown force waited, its true nature and intentions a mystery yet to be revealed. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.